It's been another couple of weeks and we are back with another aviation news. And today we have a lot of interesting stuff to talk about, so let's just get straight into it. So we're just going to start directly off with something that we talked about in the last video, and it's kind of similar. It is that a Indigo passenger opened the door during takeoff. So if you missed last week, or I'm saying last week, it wasn't last week, but if you missed the last video, then it was an Asiana Airlines passenger that opened the door while they were flying, or they were about to land, but yeah, they were still in the air. So now it's kind of the opposite. It's kind of the same, but the opposite. So basically, an Indigo passenger tries to open the door during takeoff. So it was a flight from Hyderabad to New Delhi on the July 8th. So we don't have that much info about it, except for that the plane was on the runway, the pilots were increasing the throttle, and then the plane was going around 80 to 100 knots, and then the passenger opened the door. And then obviously that caused chaos and panic, both to the passengers and to the crew. Then he was handed back to the authorities when they landed. And actually, believe it or not, Indigo is kind of useless because it's not the first time this has happened. Because it happened before on a flight from Nagpur to Mumbai, where somebody opened the door, or at least attempted to open the door while still in the air. And then obviously, like I said in the beginning, this also happened a couple of weeks ago with Asiana Airways. And next up, we're going to talk about China Eastern, because they've just got, or they're about to get their second Coman C919. So last year, the first C919 was built, and then it was given to China Eastern around May. So they have said that a total of 5 C919s will be delivered. Yeah, basically the flights will mostly be going from Shanghai to Chengdu International Airport, or CFU. China Eastern also says that they want to kind of keep it inside of China and use it for domestic flights. So next up, we're going to talk about a Qantas A380 that had technical failures on 2 flights, and it was actually the same plane. So the first flight was on July 13th with flight QF1, and then the second one was on July 14th with flight QF2, but we're going to talk about that later. So flight QF1 is from Sydney to Singapore, and then a stopover in Singapore, and then Singapore to London. The plane registered was VHOQI. So the problems started at around flight level 400 or 400,000 feet in the air, and then they were around 60 nautical miles southeast of Frankfurt. But the pilots decided not to divert and just to continue the flight because it wasn't that big, it was just a autopilot failure. And then around 60 minutes later they landed successfully. And then now back to the second flight. So it happened on July 14th, like I said, on flight QF2. The same plane, it was now supposed to fly back to Singapore and then to Australia. And then it was flying around flight level 330, and it was on its way to Singapore Changi. And then it was flying over around Central Europe, around Hungary. And then it experienced technical problems. And then the pilots decided to go back to Frankfurt and divert. And then apparently what it was that the aircraft's navigation system was not working. Oh yeah, and also to add on top of that, it was a heavyweight landing. Because obviously they had fuel to be on that long flight, so then they needed to land heavy. Because they didn't have time to release a lot of the fuel. And then next up, we're going to talk about a fight on Air India. It was a flight from Sydney to New Delhi on the July 9th. And Verma, which was a passenger, but also was the head of in-flight service, was hit by another passenger. But we're going to come back to that soon. Because let's start off from the beginning. She was flying from New Delhi to Sydney and then Sydney back. The first flight she had flown in economy, but then she decided to treat herself back to New Delhi and book business class. So then she booked business class, but then when she came, she got economy. Then she talked to her seat neighbor in economy, and then she realized he started to talk loudly, and then he was in the galley getting alcohol bottles and talking loudly. Then all of a sudden, he turned his head and then hit Verma. And then what I think is weird is that Air India have not taken any actions to the passenger. And yeah, this happened for quite a while now. Like, I get if it was like yesterday or something, but it's been quite a while now because, like I said, this happened on July 9th. So, yeah. And now we're going to be talking about Qatar Airways and another diversion, because a Qatar Airways flight diverted because of an oil leak. So this happened on July 12th, and this was on a A350-1000 that was going to fly from Doha to Tokyo with flight 806. But then the pilots decided to divert to Seoul because of a oil leak. And also, if you're wondering, the plane registration is A7ANE. And now we're going to talk about something that happened with Ryanair. And it's not the first thing, because we have more later on in the video. And that is, but we're going to start off with this. And it is that a Ryanair near miss in Porto. So it was Monday, 26th of June. The Ryanair, so it was Monday, June 26th. The Ryanair plane was about to, had its final approach in Porto, when all of a sudden the pilot saw a Azores Airlines plane on the runway. The plane was around 850 meters away from the Azure A321neo, and the plane was around 300 feet high up. But luckily, the pilots decided to do a go-around and nobody got hurt. But it was a near miss. And now, next of all, we're going to talk about something where 4 people got hurt. And that is that 4 people injured on a Allegiant A320 when it hits turbulence over Florida. So the flight happened on July 12th. I know that I'm kind of switching between dates, but it happened on July 12th. It was operating flight G4227 from Asheville Regional Airport, or AVL, to St. Petersburg in Florida. There was 179 passengers and 6 crew on board. And then all of a sudden, when they were starting their descent, the turbulence started. And it started off just minor, but then it became serious just in a matter of seconds. The crew were still walking around, preparing the plane for the descent. So several crew were thrown to the floor, and then both crew and passengers that weren't buckled went flying up and down, flew up to the ceiling and then back down. And then 2 crew and 2 passengers got taken to the hospital once they landed. And next up, we're going to be talking about something that happened kind of recently, and that is that a water truck catched on fire by an Air Canada flight. So it was a flight, this happened on July 9th. It was a Air Canada 777-300ER registered CFITL. The flight was from Geneva International Airport, or GVA, and it was going to fly to Montreal, or YUL. Almost everyone had deboarded. There was around 20 to 30 people on board. And then a water truck that was gonna, for sewage and for the water and stuff, went over to the plane to hook everything up, and then it started a fire. And then also black smoke entered the cabin. So then all of the 20 to 30 people, luckily everyone managed to quickly get off and nobody was injured. But the plane was damaged and also the smoke entered the cabin because of how big it was, as you can see on the video. But luckily, after around 30 minutes, the fire trucks handled everything and everything was fine. And now last but not least, another thing about Ryanair, and that is that a Ryanair passenger falls off the jet bridge while trying to make a plane. So basically, it was a late passenger that was trying to get on board the plane. And also the jet bridge was already disconnected, the door was closed, so I don't really know what he was thinking. So then he was trying to balance on the edge of the opening. And also this happened at Malaga Airport, or AGP. And also here we can see on the video, somebody was recording, so we can see here. He shouted to the ground crew to bring him a ladder. But while he was doing that, he fell off. He lost his balance and fell off. Luckily, the ground crew were able to catch him before he got injured. And even if they wouldn't have caught him, yes, it would have still hurted. But I might be wrong, but I don't think he would die because it was only from 3.5 meters. Which, yes, it's still a lot, but I don't think you would be able to die of it. But luckily, everything was fine because the ground crew were able to catch him. The flight that was going to go to Morocco was around an hour delayed because of this. So that was all for today's video. Like, subscribe, and turn on that notification bell. And yeah, I'll talk to you guys in the next video. Bye!